At 34,000 feet, a Boeing 737 cuts silently through the clear blue skies over Greece. But inside, there's something horribly wrong. No one is responding. Passengers sit motionless, flight attendants remain slumped in their seats, and the pilots completely silent. The plane continues on its programmed route, eerily empty of life, like a ghost soaring through the heavens. Military radar operators are confused. Controllers are calling again and again, but there's no answer. In desperation, fighter jets are scrambled to intercept. As they pull alongside, the fighter pilots peer into the cockpit, and what they see chills them to the bone. This is the haunting true story of Helios Airways Flight 522, forever remembered as the Greek ghost flight disaster. A tragic chain of errors, missed warnings, and human oversights led to a nightmare in the skies and the loss of 121 souls. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling events minute by minute, from takeoff to the very last heroic act that almost saved the day. And before we dive in, subscribe to Aviation Black Box, where we bring you the untold stories behind history's most shocking air disasters. Your support helps us continue to share these real-life tales of courage, tragedy, and lessons learned. A routine morning in Cyprus. It was the morning of August 14th, 2005, a typical summer day on the island of Cyprus. The sun rose over the Mediterranean, bathing Larnaca International Airport in golden light. Holidaymakers, families, and business travelers crowded the terminal, eager to reach their destinations across Europe. Among the departing flights that morning was Helios Airways Flight 522, a Boeing 737-31S, registration 5B-DBY. Helios Airways was a small budget airline based in Cyprus, catering primarily to tourists. Flight 522 was scheduled to travel from Larnaca, Cyprus, to Prague, Czech Republic, with a short stop in Athens, Greece. On board were 115 passengers, many of them families heading on vacation, including children, and 6 crew members, bringing the total to 121 souls on board. Most were Cypriot and Greek nationals, with a few foreign tourists among them. The flight was commanded by Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten, a 59-year-old German pilot with decades of experience. His first officer was Pampos Charalambous, a 51-year-old Cypriot with extensive knowledge of the 737. The cabin crew was led by Chief Flight Attendant Andreas Prodromou, a young and dedicated professional known for his calm under pressure. Everything seemed normal. The aircraft was fueled, baggage was loaded, and passengers boarded without incident. No one suspected that a small maintenance issue from the night before would soon set off a chain of events leading to one of aviation's most haunting disasters. The maintenance oversight. The night before the flight, the aircraft had undergone a routine maintenance check. The crew was investigating a reported issue with a frozen rear service door seal, which could cause a false takeoff configuration alarm during taxi or climb. To test the system, ground engineers had to switch the pressurization control from auto to manual. Normally, after testing, this switch should be reset to auto, ensuring the aircraft could automatically regulate cabin pressure during the climb. But on this night, the switch was left in manual mode, either forgotten by maintenance or overlooked during handover. This small oversight would prove fatal. During the pre-flight checks the next morning, both pilots reviewed their checklist. However, they failed to notice that the pressurization selector was still set to manual. This meant that as the aircraft climbed, the cabin would not automatically pressurize, a situation that could rapidly turned deadly. Takeoff and initial climb. At 9:07 a.m. local time, Flight 522 pushed back from the gate at Larnaca. The engines roared to life, and moments later, the Boeing 737 rolled down the runway, lifting gracefully into the sky. As the plane climbed through 12,000 feet, a warning horn suddenly blared inside the cockpit. This was the same intermittent horn used for two completely different warnings: takeoff configuration warning while on the ground, cabin altitude warning in flight. Because the sound was identical, it caused confusion. The pilots mistakenly believed it was related to the maintenance issue from the night before, perhaps a problem with the rear service door or air conditioning system. They did not recognize that the actual issue was loss of cabin pressure. At the same time, the cabin crew and passengers began to feel the effects of hypoxia, a dangerous condition caused by lack of oxygen. Passengers may have felt lightheaded, dizzy, or euphoric, while the crew experienced tunnel vision and confusion. The pilots, under the effects of hypoxia themselves, grew increasingly disoriented. Instead of donning their oxygen masks, they focused on troubleshooting what they believed was an air conditioning problem. They contacted Helios Maintenance Control on the ground to report the warning horn and discussed it with engineers. Unfortunately, the conversation was muddled and unclear. The maintenance engineer reportedly asked, "Where is the pressurization switch?" But the captain, in his hypoxia-induced haze, misunderstood the question and replied that the circuit breakers were in. This crucial misunderstanding sealed the fate of Flight 522. The silent climb. As the plane continued climbing, the oxygen levels in the cabin dropped further. At approximately 18,000 feet, automatic oxygen masks deployed in the cabin. Passengers, now struggling to breathe, grabbed for the masks in panic. Inside the cockpit, the pilots were slowly losing consciousness. Their thinking became clouded, their actions sluggish. Hypoxia is insidious. Victims often don't realize they are impaired. By the time the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 34,000 feet, both pilots were likely incapacitated, slumped silently in their seats. The Boeing 737 continued flying normally under autopilot, following its programmed route toward Athens. To air traffic controllers, it appeared to be a routine flight, except that no one was answering the radio calls. Controllers repeatedly tried to contact Flight 522, growing increasingly concerned as the minutes ticked by. Other aircraft were asked to reach out to the plane, but there was no response. It was as if the aircraft had vanished into silence. The ghost flight. At 10:20 a.m., Greek authorities made a chilling decision. They scrambled two F-16 fighter jets to intercept the unresponsive airliner. As the fighter pilots approached the Boeing 737, they were stunned by what they saw. Peering into the cockpit, they saw the captain slumped motionless over the controls, his oxygen mask dangling unused. The first officer was also unconscious, sitting upright, but completely unresponsive. The fighter pilots scanned the passenger cabin through the windows. Inside, they saw a horrifying sight: rows of passengers, motionless, with oxygen masks dangling from their faces. The once lively holiday flight was now a ghost plane, flying perfectly on autopilot, with no one at the controls. The fighter pilots reported back to Athens air traffic control, confirming the worst fears. Everyone on board appeared to be incapacitated. A glimmer of hope, the hero flight attendant. As the Boeing 737 continued to Athens, there was a sudden sign of movement. One of the fighter pilots noticed a man entering the cockpit. This was Flight Attendant Andreas Prodromou, the chief steward. Unlike most on board, he had some flight training and had managed to stay conscious slightly longer by using a portable oxygen bottle. Realizing the dire situation, Andreas heroically attempted to save the flight. He sat in the captain's seat and tried to take control. But there were enormous challenges. He was not a licensed 737 pilot. The engines were now failing due to fuel exhaustion. Communication systems were limited. The fighter pilots saw Andreas desperately waving at them, attempting to signal. But time was running out. At approximately 11:54 a.m., the left engine flamed out, followed minutes later by the right engine. The aircraft, now without power, began descending rapidly. The final moments. Inside the cockpit, Andreas battled to keep the plane aloft. He tried to reach the controls and may have even attempted a restart procedure, but it was too late. At 12:04 p.m., with both engines silent, Flight 522 began its final, uncontrolled descent. At 12:05 p.m., after more than 2 hours of ghostly flight, the aircraft crashed into a hillside near the village of Grammatiko, just 25 miles northeast of Athens. The impact was catastrophic. Everyone on board, 121 people, was killed instantly. The once silent blue sky was now filled with smoke and wreckage, marking the end of one of aviation's most haunting events. The investigation. In the aftermath, Greek and Cypriot investigators launched a massive inquiry. The Hellenic Air Accident Investigation and Aviation Safety Board, AAIASB, worked tirelessly to uncover what had happened. The final report revealed a tragic chain of human errors. Maintenance error. The pressurization switch was left in manual mode after testing and never reset. Pre-flight. Oversight. The pilots failed to notice the incorrect setting during their checklist. Confusing warning horn. The identical sound for two very different warnings caused deadly confusion. Communication. Breakdown. The conversation with maintenance on the ground was misunderstood. Hypoxia. The pilots became incapacitated before they could recognize the real problem. The report concluded that if the pilots had recognized the warning horn as a cabin altitude alarm and used their oxygen masks immediately, they could have corrected the pressurization manually and saved the flight. Aftermath and accountability. The tragedy shocked Greece, Cyprus, and the world. Families were devastated as they learned the final, haunting moments of their loved ones. In the months that followed, Helios Airways faced intense scrutiny and public outrage. Several executives and employees were criminally charged for negligence. The airline was eventually rebranded as Ajet before shutting down completely in 2006. The investigation also led to significant changes in pilot training and cockpit design, including clearer differentiation between warning sounds, emphasis on hypoxia recognition and oxygen mask procedures, stricter maintenance handover protocols, legacy of Flight 522, the haunting image of a ghostly plane flying silently for hours, left an indelible mark on aviation history. The story of Andreas Prodromou, the flight attendant who fought until the very last moment, became a symbol of courage and determination. Though he could not save the flight, his actions gave investigators vital clues about what happened in those final minutes. Today, Helios Flight 522 is studied in aviation schools worldwide as a case study in human factors, system design, and crisis management. Conclusion. Helios Airways Flight 522 was supposed to be a simple holiday journey, a short hop between sun-soaked islands and bustling cities. Instead, it became one of aviation's most chilling disasters. A flight crew incapacitated by hypoxia, a plane left to wander the sky on autopilot, and a final, heroic attempt to avert tragedy. In just 2 hours, a series of small mistakes cascaded into the loss of 121 lives. The disaster serves as a stark reminder. In aviation, there are no small errors. Every switch, every procedure, and every communication matters. And though the sky that day carried a ghostly silence, the lessons learned from Flight 522 continue to speak loudly, ensuring that such a tragedy never happens again.